Good evening, everyone. I'm Diana Williams, and welcome to the final and the only live debate between the two major party mayoral candidates. They are Republican candidate Michael Bloomberg and Democratic candidate Mark Green. Over the next hour, we are going to question the candidates about issues that you care about to help you make an informed decision when you go to the polls on Tuesday, November 6th. I'll be joined in the questioning by a team of reporters throughout the city. Eyewitness News political reporter Dave Evans in Brooklyn, Eyewitness News reporter David Ushry is in Queens, WNYC radio reporter Brian Lehrer is in Staten Island, and Eyewitness News reporter Joe Torres is in the Bronx. This debate is administered by the New York City Campaign Finance Board. Chairman Father Joseph O'Hare explains how the program works.
Welcome to the New York City Campaign Finance Board's final mayoral debate for candidates in the general election. Candidates who are judged leading contenders by objective criteria and who are participants in the New York City Campaign Finance Program are obliged to participate in this evening's debate. Candidates who have chosen not to participate in the program, but who are judged leading contenders, are invited to participate in this evening's debate. The New York City Campaign Finance Program seeks to reduce the influence of money on elections by establishing limits on expenditures and contributions for candidates who choose to participate. These candidates, in return, receive public matching funds to support their campaigns. Information about the candidates and the debates is available in the board's 2001 voter guide, which voters have received before the general election. We hope you'll find this debate helpful as you make up your mind on who you're going to vote for on Election Day.
Now, our debate includes several questioning formats, and we're going to begin first with a series of general questions. Each candidate is going to get 1 minute to answer the question, and by random drawing, the first question is going to go to Mr. Bloomberg. And our first question goes to the issue of qualifications and experience. What is it about your opponent that you find insufficient for the office of mayor? Mr. Bloomberg.
My opponent has not had any experience in managing a large organization, in leading a large number of people, in setting large budgets, in actually doing things. My opponent's experience is as an analyst and as a public advocate, but when it comes to leading this city, he does not have the experience for 250,000 employees and a $40 billion budget.
Mr. Green.
Of the two of us, I'm the only one who's spent time in the public sector. My rival hasn't spent 1 minute in public life managing a budget. I ran an agency of 350 people, $17 million. I put together coalitions to reduce domestic violence in the workplace, coalitions to get tobacco signs out of communities that were addicting our children. If creating jobs in the private sector, which is a great thing, were the criterion, Bill Gates for mayor, since his company is 25 times larger than that of my rivals. When my rival wrote in his book, politics, whatever the cynics may say, is a noble profession, he was right then, but his contemptuous slogan now, I think, is wrong.
Okay. Our next question is for Mr. Green, and it comes from Dave Evans, who is out in Brooklyn. Dave?
Thank you, Diana. Mr. Green, you have different philosophy about how to rebuild in Lower Manhattan compared to your rival. You would like to see, I understand, some kind of a city, state, federal agency oversee rebuilding Lower Manhattan since the September 11th disaster. However, your rival sees this as another bureaucratic agency and thinks that the mayor, the MTA, and the Port Authority can handle it just fine. What are the major differences between these two plans, and why does it matter?
There are a lot of overlapping jurisdictions, the private sector, the MTA, the Port Authority, the state, and the city. The way to cut through the red tape and the bureaucracy and immediately start digging and rebuilding is to have a new state, city, public-private, business, labor, redevelopment authority. I proposed it a week after the attack. I spoke to Governor Pataki and Speaker Silver, and they are now negotiating based on my outline. I'm pleased that the New York Times and Crane's business report, in endorsing me, said that my plan was far preferable to keep jobs here, start rebuilding downtown, start rebuilding the economy. Why? The state creates the city. You can't suddenly say, if you're in a private company, you could say, I'm going to run it all. This is not a private company. If the state government creates us and contributes money, the governor and the mayor have to be finally accountable for downtown Manhattan.
Okay, Mr. Bloomberg.
The rebuilding is going to be done with private money. And there is no rush. It is going to take us a year to recover the bodies of the missing and to clean up. It is going to take us a number of years to find what industry wants to go there and to get the companies to sign leases before we start constructing. I see no rush that is so important that we should give away our sovereignty. This is New York City. New York City voters have a right to have a government that they elect that is responsive to them, that will do what they need. We have shown that we know how to handle situations. We've shown we know how to build. Adding a level of bureaucracy adds absolutely nothing. If we need a state agency to raise debt, we can always create it. We have a few, you can create another one. We have the power of eminent domain in the city. But the city should be responsible for its own destiny.
Gentlemen, given all the pain associated with that area, the World Trade Center site, how would you encourage people to want to go back to work in that area? Mr. Green, real quick.
Well, two things. I toured it twice in the last 3 weeks, visiting residents who couldn't get back to Gateway Plaza and were nervous in Battery Park City, visiting stores that had courageously reopened but had lost 50 to 70% of their business. Number one, I urge Commissioner Carrick, to the extent that you can reduce it as a live crime scene, every day that goes by, it's less so, and more a residential community, getting rid of the concrete and metal barricades. Second, Senator Schumer and Clinton are proposing a $3,000 federal tax credit for residents and employees who stay.
This is meant to be a quick question with a quick answer. Go ahead, Mr. Bloomberg.
It is going to be hard to find an industry that wants to go down there. What we've got to do is we've got to find a rationale why a group of companies will want to go there. And the two rationales that work are proximity to each other and having a labor force that wants to work in this city. It is probably not going to be the financial services industry that goes back in there, but biotech or information technology or fashion.
Okay. Our next question comes from David Ushery, who is out in Queens. David?
Gentlemen, New Yorkers are on edge, especially given the latest warning from the FBI earlier this week. One woman we spoke to here in Queens says she can't help but fear another attack.
Worrying about, like say if I have to go handle some business like the doctor's office, I'm worrying about, is it going to be a bomb planted in the doctor's office and nobody know nothing about it? Is it going to be bombs planted in the daycare centers where nobody don't know about it? Is it going to be bombs planted in subways? I'm very scared.
Name 3 things that you could do as mayor to try and ensure that New Yorkers are as safe as possible.
Get out as much information as you can every single day. The first thing is to let the public know what's going on. The second thing is to make sure that our police force, who is working with the federal government, takes the appropriate steps to ensure our safety. And the third thing is try to convince people to exercise some common sense, but go about their normal lives. You can't let the terrorists win. Leave security to the experts.
Mr. Green.
Beyond, as Mayor Giuliani has done, urging people to get on with their lives, as London and Jerusalem do after lesser terrorist attacks. First, you have to have a deputy commissioner for counterterrorism at the NYPD and appoint people or consult with people who know what they're doing. I'm proud that Bill Bratton, Jerry Hauer, Peggy Hamburg, Sandy Berger, experts on these matters, have been advising me. Second, public health is public safety. You have to protect the public health function of the health department. So there's disease surveillance. So if there, God forbid, something happens, hypothetically on a subway, you can immediately detect it by people going into emergency rooms. Third, you need more points of departure, PODs. So if something bad happens, everybody knows where to go for vaccine. It's pretty hard to get the vaccine, even if it's stockpiled, to the people who might need it.
Okay. I know David Ushery has a follow-up. David?
Thank you, Diana. Yes, I just want to ask them. They both mentioned the reliance on the NYPD. Many specialized units of the NYPD have had to shift their focus now to the anti-terrorism efforts, whether it be for extra manpower at major events like a World Series game or for the overall heightened security. Over time, are there going to be fewer police officers in the neighborhoods protecting New Yorkers not from terrorists but from murderers, rapists, robbers? Is there anything you can do to make sure that New Yorkers are protected from street criminals as well?
I've long advocated getting a lot of police officers out from behind their desks in the precincts, out from behind their desks at one police plaza and onto the streets. Too many officers sometimes historically have been repairing cars, been involved in information service. I think we can have more police on patrol in the street. Obviously, though, we have to move people from other tactical squads into counterterrorism to respond to the new threats.
Mr. Bloomberg.
We already have somebody that's responsible for terrorism in the NYPD. They take it very seriously. They are working with the federal government. We've been doing that certainly since September 11th. What you have to do is you have to continue the combination of community policing, where the police do stay in the neighborhood, and have the specialized units. So far, there is no evidence that the NYPD can't handle both. While we've been working on counterterrorism, crime has stayed down.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Our next question is for Mr. Green, and it comes from Brian Lehrher, who is out on Staten Island. Brian.
Thank you, Diana. Mr. Green, the city lost more jobs in the first month after the terrorist attacks than many cities lose in a decade of recession. People are sleeping overnight in lines for job fairs. Here on Staten Island, some people worry that the economy might never recover.
I worry about it's just going to be continued downsliding, and I'm hoping that that's not going to happen, but I'm afraid that it might be the case, given the statistics, that just continue happening.
So, Mr. Green, in an era when people are sleeping overnight in lines for job fairs, what could you do as mayor to bring the jobs back?
We did lose 100,000 jobs and over time $100 billion, according to Comptroller Hevesy, in a sense, in an hour and a half. The private sector can do something, and it is. I spoke to the employees at the Service Employees International Union, the doormen and the janitors, and they have a system with the real estate industry where the first jobs that become available are now filled by the people who lost their jobs. Second, again, Senators Clinton and Schumer have a very good idea to provide a federal tax credit to companies who lease out and stay there, so it encourages companies to come back to downtown. And third, obviously, we're all hopeful that Washington will provide the aid necessary to make us whole and get back on our feet. But let's go beyond that. Every federal agency has discretionary funds. They should each take a New York first attitude, as we do when there are fires in California. So at the Department of Labor, they have workforce training funds. We should get first dibs on them because of our sudden unemployment.
Thank you. Mr. Bloomberg.
I don't think that the federal government can do very much to encourage jobs, nor are they willing to help us with our problem. What we have to do is to make sure that New York is a place where companies want to stay and want to come. It has to be good for investment. It has to be good for the company's employees. In this day and age, companies go where their employees want to live, not the reverse. Companies go where their competitors and customers and suppliers already are. We have to do some things like helping with building permits so they can build new office space here. We have to go and help small businesses get over the problem of their not being able to pay the rent. We have to go to big companies and say, we will give you tax abatements if you will stay here. But plain and simple, if we keep this city a good place for their employees, if we keep the quality of life up, these companies will stay because that's where their employees want to be.
Okay, I'm curious about your positions on casino gambling in New York City as a way of providing new jobs. Mr. Bloomberg, where do you stand on casino
I am
gambling
opposed to it. I think I think that gambling is regressive, and it has not worked in helping any economy that I know of so far.
And Mr. Green?
I'm against it on Governor's Island. I'm against it for now anywhere in the city. There are extraordinary revenue demands that are going to be on us, and there'll be a triage table that the next mayor has to sit down to figure out how to fill the gap. I'm against casino gambling, although I support Governor Pataki and Sheldon Silver, who are proposing it upstate in depressed areas where those areas want it, and it could help revive those economies, help the state budget, which would help New York indirectly.
Well, why is it better for those economies and not for New York City?
They want it. We don't. And there is a collection of pathologies around it that could occur if we had it in New York. But upstate is so destitute, Diana. They need it so badly that they persuaded the governor to do it.
Do you support, Mr. Bloomberg, gambling in upstate?
I want to be the mayor of the city of New York, not the governor of the state of New York.
Okay.
I agree.
And our next question is for Mr. Bloomberg. It comes from Joe Torres, who is out in the Bronx for us. Joe.
Diana, thank you. Gentlemen, let's focus our attention a little bit on the economy in the outer boroughs specifically. Many people in the outer boroughs here in the Bronx as well feel that even in the boom times of New York City, that the good folks in the outer boroughs just simply haven't fared as well as the people there in Manhattan. So the question is, especially now with the focus centered so much in Manhattan, How do you make sure that the people in the outer boroughs will not continue to be shortchanged? Mr. Bloomberg?
I think what you have to realize is that most big companies want to be in Manhattan. The companies that are willing to go to the other boroughs are willing to do it when they want support services. What we can do as a city is we can move some of the city jobs out of Manhattan to the other boroughs. 85% of all government jobs in New York are in Manhattan. If we were to move some of those out, we would create more space in New York for those in Manhattan for those companies that want to stay there. We would reduce the traffic into Manhattan. We would encourage economic activity out in the 4 other boroughs. And it's something we can do. We don't have to ask anybody. We can be in control of our own destiny.
Okay. Mr. Green?
Every borough has assets, not the same assets. I visited Hunts Point, their produce market, their fish markets in the South Bronx. It's exploding as the best regional distribution point for food in the Northeast because it's close to so many arterial assets. And so the city should lean over backwards to invest in that area with infrastructure so Hunts Point and the South Bronx flourish. Second, downtown Brooklyn. A year and a half ago, I had a plan with a state city redevelopment authority that could do for downtown Brooklyn what a similar authority did for West 42nd Street. You have tech zones in and around universities. Downtown already has, for example, 35,000 students and faculty, cultural assets, 15 rail and bus lines. We need an economic development consciousness that focuses not only on Manhattan, but invests in building up the demand and assets that are already in our other boroughs.
Okay. A question for both of you regarding transportation. Traffic was bad before September 11th. It is even worse now. There are restrictions on trucks. There are security checks in place. It is very, very difficult to get around this city, especially for companies that are trying to deliver goods. Everything from milk getting to the local deli, cement trucks getting to the job sites. What can be done to maintain security, and at the same time ease up some of the traffic problems in this city? And Mr. Green, we begin with you.
I'm reminded of the Yogi Berra aphorism, nobody comes here anymore, it's too crowded. Traffic was bad, is worse, of course, because of the catastrophe and security. First, one of the smartest investments the city and the region can make through the Port Authority is an across-harbor freight tunnel. 3% of all our goods are in and out by rail. Other major cities, it's 30%. We don't connect to the mainland well enough. And user fees could over time easily pay for that. Second, with new software and technology, we can have more congestion pricing, charging people much more during peak time to park and to come in. And I think that could help mitigate the traffic flows.
Mr. Bloomberg?
I think that the cross-harbor tunnel is a nice idea, but it's been on the drawing boards for 80 years, and today we don't have the money to do it, number one, and number two, the security issue would just be mind-boggling. It would also destroy Brooklyn where it would come out. The roads just can't handle the trucks that would have to get to the trains. In terms of looking at traffic, I think you have to define what traffic is. First and foremost, number one priority, emergency service vehicles. Number two, pedestrians. Number three, mass transit. Number four, commercial vehicles. Number five, cars. If you want to ease the traffic, you have to go and force people into mass transit. And the ways that you do that is with express bus lanes. We can't afford, even if we could, short-term building new subways, not going to solve the problem. But express bus lanes where you really did enforce the bus lanes, limited stop service could get you around the city better. It would also make it more difficult for cars, which is what we want.
What about eliminating all passenger traffic into New York City? Would you support that?
No, I don't think you can do that politically. And also, you're destroying we want people to come to this city. We're on the other side of that. You want to make it easier for people to get here. Putting any barrier to get somebody to come here when we're trying to get jobs and companies and investment here is just the wrong ways to go.
And the current restrictions, and I'll let you answer these as well, Mr. Green. Current restrictions, keep them?
The mayor's at least trying something with the dual occupancy vehicles. If it works, great. If it doesn't, try something else. But you have to constantly try things. Clearly, there are too many cars for too few roads.
Mr. Green?
Inexperience in government shows. Mayor Giuliani is for the cross-harbor freight tunnel. A recent economic impact statement done by Jerry Nadler, an economic agency, shows it's cost-effective. And finally, it's good for downtown and all of Brooklyn because it reduces by 1 million truck trips that are now rattling the streets and the houses and polluting Brooklyn. Brooklyn is for it. Our mayor is for it.
As for passenger traffic in and out of the city, keep restrictions, eliminate it?
Are you talking about dual occupancy? I want to see the results. If anyone as mayor 2 months ago had proposed it, they would have been laughed at. It had to be done because of the emergency. I want to see how it affects traffic flow, the parking lot and garage industry, the taxi industry, and pollution. I want to see the data, and then I'll make a decision. I don't want to make a decision before I see the real-world evidence.
Okay. Our next question is from Mr. Bloomberg, and it comes from Joe Torres, who is out in the Bronx for us. Joe?
Diana, and it's about education, just a big issue throughout this campaign. Education remains a top priority, if not the top priority for many New York City parents. In fact, one woman here in the Bronx told us the public schools simply are not working for her child.
How is he learning? He's not learning. My son, and they keep passing him. I told him last year to leave him back. They told me, no, they're not going to leave him back. They're going to promote him anyway. They promoted him. He's not learning anything. How can he be promoted? He's in 8th grade, but he's reading and doing math on 3rd and 4th grade level. How is that?
How is that? Mr. Bloomberg, you've outlined a plan that would reward teachers with raises, a plan that forgoes an immediate move to reduce class size in the public schools. At a time of crisis in public education over that very issue, how can you defend that?
I'm not opposed to reducing class size. I'm just realistic about how much money we have. If we don't have enough to go around, you have to set priorities. My number one priority is to protect the existing teachers that work in the school system. Unfortunately, after 2 or 3 years, a lot of young teachers leave because they just don't get paid enough to live. So I want to pay those teachers more, reduce the turnover in the classroom, which is so disruptive. If we absolutely don't have enough teachers, then of course you hire teachers. Nobody's suggesting that we would have a class without somebody at the front of the room. But in terms of reducing class size, it is just not a viable option today. We don't have the classrooms and we don't have the money. First and foremost, let's make what we have work as well as we can. Get rid of the Board of Ed, empower the principals, move disruptive kids out of the classroom, and you'll fix the problem.
Mr. Green?
I don't know an issue on where we differ more than on education. And again, my rival has shown that he's out of touch and doesn't understand the neighborhoods and the families of New York. I visited 50 schools. I speak to parents and teachers and principals. They want smaller class sizes, and my class size coalition has a lot of ways to do it without big budget expenditures. We want more computers and technology in the classrooms. He's 5 times said we want fewer computers in the classrooms. I was at Kingsbridge yesterday and in the Bronx. They want a school there. My rivals said communities don't want new schools there. Finally, we have to pay teachers more, especially in return for more performance. And in addition, I don't want to defund our public schools by giving vouchers to private schools. On these issues, we couldn't be farther apart.
Well, Mr. Bloomberg, you want to respond?
Mark, you have a right to your own opinions, but not a right to your own facts. Nobody is suggesting vouchers. I've clearly said that it is not something that will work in this city. In terms of computers, nobody's opposed to computer literacy. Your idea of computer literacy for all kids by grade 6 and not worrying about whether they can read or do math is just wrong-headed. I would rather have books than computers anytime. The basic skills are more important today than ever before. The problem with the school system is not that the kids can't type, not that they can't use Word or Microsoft Windows. The problem is they can't read, they can't write, they can't speak and read in English, they can't do math.
10 times you have written and been quoted as saying you want fewer computers in the classroom, and if you had your way, you'd want vouchers which would defund public schools for private schools. You're allowed to say that it's politically unrealistic, but if, God forbid, you became mayor, it would be more realistic. I want to invest in the 1.1 million kids in public schools and not spend them on private schools. And I visited Learning to Win in Harlem. Kids were online. No one would say you don't want to have literacy and numeracy in the early grades, but if they're not online by the time they graduate 6th grade, they won't be productive and smart and healthy workers.
I'll let you quickly respond, and then we're going to move on.
I know of no technology that a child can learn that would be remotely useful by the time they graduate from school. The fact of the matter is the more technology we have, the more important the basic things are, the basic skills are important. You come back reading, writing, and math.
Okay, let's go back out to Joe. He's got a follow-up question. Joe?
Yeah, Diana, we'll stick with education, bilingual education. Mr. Green, do you support it? And what do you believe is the best approach to teach English to the children in our schools who speak a different language?
Well, it's great if our students learn the language of the regional hemispheric economy. It's English and it's Spanish. I visited a school in Carroll Gardens where for a week all the students, Latino and non-Latino, spoke only Spanish. The next week, only English. At the end of the year, they spoke everything. Bilingual education is essential. The problem is that half the teachers who teach it are not certified in it. That's the reason it's failing. I support Harold Levy's immersion alternative for parents who want it.
Okay, Mr. Bloomberg?
The most important thing for a child is to learn to speak and write English. This is an English-speaking country, and without being fluent in English, you will never participate in the great American dream. Number one, speak and read English.
Gentlemen, would you both provide the Chancellor with the $70 million that he wants in order to fund the bilingual program? Mr. Green?
Budget permitting, it is a high priority. I've met a lot of parents who don't want immersion, but those who do should have that option.
And what about you, Mr. Bloomberg?
Well, budget permitted, if we had all the money in the world, we could do everything. I think we certainly have to educate the kids, but I don't know that we need more money for this. The first thing is go back to teaching English.
Okay. Our next question is for Mr. Bloomberg, and it's from Dave Evans, who is out in Brooklyn. Dave?
Diana, a question about politics for just a second. Mr. Bloomberg, you've admitted in the past that you switched to the Republican Party because you wanted to run for mayor and also because the Democratic field was pretty crowded when the race began. Also, you quit 4 private clubs with exclusive memberships, mostly predominantly white memberships. An assistant of yours has said in the past that you did this basically because you had to do this to run for office. Someone might look at these 2 actions and ask, is this being a political opportunist?
Well, I was a Democrat up until about a year ago. It was obvious that I could not run for mayor in the Democratic Party when there were 4 candidates who'd spent their lifetime working in the Democratic Party. The Republican Party approached me, and if I think that I can make a difference, I would just never forgive myself if I didn't try. I don't have any problems with running. The labels don't matter. The Republican Party is something that in this part of the country, I agree with a lot of their philosophies, not with everybody or everything, but the fact that I get a chance to make a difference is what really matters. In terms of clubs, I joined a few clubs that were created because other people couldn't get in to the clubs they wanted to, so they created their own. Some changed when I was in, some did not. When they didn't change as much as they should, I got out of those clubs before I ran. I didn't have to wait for somebody to tell me to go and investigate something. I knew what was right. I did it, and it was done long before I started running for office.
Okay, Mr. Green?
I never had to quit all-white clubs because I never joined them. Second, on opportunism, I'm a proud Democrat, always have been, am, and will be. I think the party from Roosevelt to Kennedy to Cuomo has been a door of opportunity to my immigrant grandparents who came here and all the new arrivals right now. My rival on page 232 of his book, Bloomberg by Bloomberg, and they call me arrogant. Said that not only that politics is a noble profession, but that people should stick with the parties that they like. He wrote, I will give money to any Democrat, even if the Republican is more qualified. As Werner Wolf would say, go to the videotape. You can look it up.
You want to say anything,
Number
Mr.
one,
Bloomberg?
I'm glad that
Very
Mark's
quickly.
read the book. I don't remember what's on page 220. It's not the sort of thing that I spend my time, or 232. I'm also pleased that you're able to describe yourself. I think a lot of people would agree with your characterization of yourself. In terms of party labels, look, it isn't so important whether you're Republican or Democrat as long as you're a New Yorker. If we've learned anything, it is getting people together here in a nonpartisan way. That's what we've done since September 11th. That's what we have to do to go forward. I've got to have lots of votes in this city, regardless of party, and that if we can put together that fusion coalition, we'll make it better.
You changed your mind in the sequel. It's okay.
Let's move on. Our next question is from David Ushry, who is out in Queens. David.
Diana, a question from along the campaign trail, if you will. Mr. Green, you recently said that if you had been mayor during the World Trade Center attacks, you would have done as good as or a better job than Mayor Giuliani. You care to explain what you meant by that?
Sure. I'm not running to fail. I'm not running to tie. The thing I like most in public life is speaking to high school graduating classes, and I always tell them, you aim low, you'll accomplish it. So I want to be the best mayor the city's ever had. I may fail, but not for lack of trying. And so when I was asked, how do you think the mayor did and how would you have done? I said, well, the mayor and I disagreed on a lot of domestic social justice issues before. I think he has risen to the occasion and had the exact right mix of resolution, compassion, rallying the public. If I told Mark Riley on WLIB, God forbid had ever been in such a situation, I hope I would have responded as well or perhaps even better. I don't see what's wrong. I don't think you should really run for mayor if you want to do less well than the incumbent. I saw that Michael said that should he become mayor, he hopes in 4 years the city would even be better than the city he inherited from Rudy Giuliani. That's the right aspiration.
Well, Mr. Bloomberg, you've had a problem with that statement.
No, I just asked the question in an ad whether anybody thought that what Mark had said was likely to happen, and used his own words and just said, really, asked the question.
I didn't object to that.
Okay. We're going to move on to our next question. It's from Brian Lair, who's on Staten Island, and it is for Mr. Bloomberg. Brian.
Diana, asthma is a huge public health problem for the children of New York City. Mr. Bloomberg, you made some news earlier in the campaign when you said you would emphasize teaching parents, quote, how to clean, unquote, rather than focusing more on the housing code or air quality. Do you stand by that tonight, and how would each of you fight the asthma problem for our kids?
Well, there was some criticism when I said that, and then the New York Times 2 weeks later had a story talking about exactly that. It is dust in the air that triggers asthma, or it's certainly one of the major things. And like all public health things, education is really the secret. You have to explain to people how diet, how smoking, how substance abuse, how alcohol abuse, how hygiene impacts their lives. And if we were to educate our population better, if everybody understood which actions will reduce the chances of getting a disease, which actions will increase the chances, we would have an awful lot less pain and suffering and an awful lot less expense in terms of curing people.
Mr. Green?
This is a real problem, one I've worked on. The rate of admission in low-income communities to emergency rooms of kids with asthma attacks is not twice as great as wealthier communities. It's 22 times greater. I've worked with We Stay, Yolanda Garcia's group in the South Bronx, and the people at Bellevue who did a study, epidemiologists there, documenting this problem. Number one, I pushed hard that the MTA budget 2 years ago have more capital funds for compressed natural gas buses that don't, like these diesel buses, spew the kind of fumes that may well be the trigger for asthma. And the governor did, not because of me, but the coalition that I organized, did spend more money for these cleaner buses. Second, I have urged that in the 10 lowest performing school districts in the city, we have special health professionals with teams, early intervention for kids with chronic conditions like asthma.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. We're now going to give each of you an opportunity to ask a question of each other. Keep your question brief if you could. You'll each have a minute to respond to the other's question. And Mr. Bloomberg, we're going to begin with you with a question for Mr. Green.
Mark, the way the runoff turned out between you and Freddie Ferrer, isn't it time to say you should conduct a real investigation of what happened? Isn't it time that you apologize for the smearing of Freddie Ferrer, saying that he was borderline irresponsible? Isn't it time to say enough, that you should not have had, or somebody should not have, in your interest, put out these disgraceful flyers and made those disgraceful calls? And will you promise right now to stop this politics of personal destruction that you seem to do every time you get close in an election?
This is a man who said 2 weeks ago he wouldn't raise these issues because it's racially divisive. So what's despicable is the hypocrisy you just heard. This is a man who runs 6 to 7 negative ads, which I haven't whined about. Now he's whining. The end of the story is that I asked my campaign people twice, did anybody know about the racially divisive and motivated literature? No one knew about it. No one's shown it. How can I apologize for something that we weren't responsible for? Finally, I couldn't be prouder that Borough President Freddie Ferrer, Bronx County Chairman Roberto Ramirez, Assembly Member Ruben Diaz Jr., Congressman Jose Serrano and his son, Councilmember Serrano, 20 of the leading officials that were for Freddie Ferrer, including Congressman Rangel in Manhattan, have all endorsed my campaign. If they've put it behind them and they think I'm the Democrat who can best be the mayor, I find this a divisive question and quite off point in terms of what this city really needs, which is to rebuild the economy and educate our children.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. Audience, if you could, hold your applause, please. We now have a question from Mr. Green to Mr. Bloomberg.
You were quoted as saying that sanitation workers have a more dangerous job than cops and firefighters. Quoted as saying communities don't want schools there. Quoted as saying that rape could be prosecuted only if there was a third-party witness. Quoted as saying domestic violence is a quality of life crime, I guess like graffiti. Would you like to now apologize for or recant any or all of these four very interesting statements?
Mark, you've taken them all out of context.
Are they all accurate?
They were certainly said, but out of context. We were talking about all city workers. Some police and fire have enormously dangerous jobs, as we've seen at the beginning. They're out there on the firing line. They can get killed. Sanitation workers and other city workers face environmental risks. The issue is, how do we get everybody home safe to their families at night? And it was in the context of talking about compensation for all city workers. When it came time to the issue of saying you needed a third-party witness, it was for a 5-year-old case that the judge dismissed 2 years after an event occurred. You do need some kind of corroborating evidence, and the judge said that. In terms of quality of life crimes, the issue is not the label. The issue is, how do you stop the despicable behavior, domestic violence? Don't worry about labels, worrying about the substance. That's what my company has done. That's what I've done. We're not talkers. We don't have an ideological position. We're not worried about labels. What we're trying to do is to just go and do something about domestic violence. Once again, you're taking these things out of context, and it's a typical smear when the time gets close.
Okay. We're now going to move back and go back to our regular questioning, though we may revisit having you question each other again at some point. Let's go to Dave Evans, who is going to ask a question of Mr. Green. Dave?
Dinah, New York City firefighters and police have been hailed across the world for their heroic efforts on September 11th. One man here in Brooklyn speaks for many who think they deserve to be paid better.
Yes, they deserve a raise. They work a hazardous job. I mean, they put their life on the line each and every day for all the citizens of New York City. They deserve at least twice as much money as they make today.
Well, the next mayor will, of course, have to negotiate new contracts with police, perhaps with firefighters, but there's a limit on how much you can pay them. Mr. Green, what kind of approach are you going to take here?
It is historically true and sad that our heroes at Ground Zero have earned double zeros in the last couple of years because of the contract that was negotiated. With a $100 billion hit on our economy, with a lot of demands to better educate our children, no candidate can beforehand say what they would give away in collective bargaining. I will tell you, I'm so proud that for the first time in 20 years, police people, firefighters, 18 uniformed service unions have endorsed a Democrat for mayor. If the cops and the firefighters have put their trust in me, I will do everything I can to pay them what they deserve. But it's beyond pay. They won't come here if they're undereducated, if precinct conditions are bad. So I want tuition assistance program up front, so any officer who doesn't yet have 4 years of college could get it over the first 5 years. We have to clean up the precincts. It's both conditions and pay. And I know about it because I talk to them.
Okay. Pay raises for uniformed services workers. Mr. Bloomberg.
We have to realize that we don't have a lot of money. We didn't before, and we have an awful lot less now. Clearly, we are losing police officers to other jobs, to other jurisdictions as well. They are underpaid, and the firefighters, you've seen the tragedy, you've seen the sacrifice that they made. I think we have to find ways to try to get both of those groups as much as we can, but we have the same issue where we're losing teachers. There are lots of city departments where the people are underpaid and our resources to solve the problem is relatively small. You have to go and you have to negotiate some ways through pensions and through pay raises and through changing the job description so that These people do not find alternatives outside of the workforce to be more attractive. But I don't think that we can possibly pay them in the next year or so what we really do owe them.
I don't hear a specific number from either of you, and I know candidates are both
you
reluctant.
You can't get in the ways of the mayor who's trying to negotiate with the unions. You can't negotiate in public either. You have to wait. But I think it is true that particularly police and firefighters have phenomenally dangerous jobs, and we have to get them more money, and we don't have it.
And clearly both of you can say we want them to get a raise, but will they get a raise? Mr. Green?
Well, of course they'll get a raise. Costs go up, pay goes up. Every percent is $30 million to the city budget, but obviously you can't propose it. I would take a look at the issue because Michael has now agreed that they do have dangerous jobs. You have to think about, should they get more for that? The presumption's in favor of the existing pattern bargaining, but I would take a fresh look in this crisis era.
Okay. Let's go to David Ushry now, who has a question for Mr. Bloomberg. David?
Diana, some of this has already surfaced, but the Democratic primary ended in a fair amount of racial discord. And race and ethnicity often play a big part in New York City politics. Now, both of the candidates, you're white, Jewish males. But Mr. Bloomberg, what will you do to bring about racial harmony in the city?
Well, I've always thought that you have to lead by example. You start at the top. The deputy mayors and the commissioners have to reflect the community. If they reflect the community, you can then get diversity all the way down. We also have to have an outreach program. You can't just sit there and wait for diversity to come to you. I think if we've learned anything, and I've certainly seen it in the private sector, you have to have concrete programs to go out, to outreach, and to try to convince people to come in and join city government every place we need it. And you go to where the people you're trying to attract. So you go into communities, you go into churches, you go into social clubs, and you try to point out the advantages of working for the city and recruit actively rather than just stand around passively and waiting for diversity to come to you.
Mr. Green?
I have a history, not just a promise. I never joined and quit all-white clubs. I helped found the Harvard Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Law Review 30 years ago. My government office as public advocate and my campaign are very inclusive and diverse, reflecting the extraordinary range and talent in the city. Should I be the mayor, so is my government. Finally, the way to understand the whole city is to go there. There are 200 different groups, 200 neighborhoods, from Flushing to Forest Hills, from Bayside to Bay Shore. I have been in every community having town meetings, visiting churches that I'm not, you can see, I'm a member of. You don't understand the city just by spending a lot of private wealth in ads in an election year. You understand the city by going to where people live and asking what they need and then reflecting it. That's why my work on class size reduction, child welfare reforms, I think will attract the support and cooperation of communities of color around this city.
Gentlemen, what do you think the minority communities want? Mr. Green?
Number one, they want smaller class sizes and better schools. Parents get desperate to me when they realize they have a bad teacher in front of their kids, or the class is 30 rather than 20. They know their child is falling behind almost irredeemably.
What do the city's minority communities want?
Education and opportunity. They feel their children are not being educated. They also feel that they do not have an opportunity to get the jobs, or in their small businesses don't have an opportunity to get government contracts. And I think it's laughable that Mark's talking about the diversity. He's got a 40-person organization that he runs, and I don't know of any senior decision-making people in the public advocate's office that are minorities. Take a look at our 8,000 people. A good third of them are minorities, and an awful lot of the senior people around the world are.
Mr. Green, you want to respond to that?
You know who Barry Ford is?
Yes, I do.
Well, he's in my office. And Shola Olate is my research director. They both happen to be black. We can't go one by one. All I can say is I have some experience in government hiring people of diversity. My 350-person consumer affairs office and my public advocate office. It's really no sin to get elected citywide to the #2 office and then seek to aspire to the #1 office.
Okay, let's go to our next question, and for that we're going to go to, I believe, Joe Torres. Joe?
Yes, Diana, thank you. Mr. Green, there have been renewed concerns about racial profiling in the wake of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, specifically the unfair targeting of people from the Middle East. The issue of racial profiling has been so much a part of this city's recent history. The question then is, what plans do you have to ensure and make sure that New Yorkers of color are not unfairly profiled?
6 years ago, before people really worked on this issue, I asked to see the files of police officers with substantiated complaints, often based on racial profiling, that were never punished. I had to sue the mayor to get the files and helped triple the rate of discipline at the NYPD because of racial profiling. Despite that leadership on racial profiling, the PBA has endorsed me because they know we can work together to have civil order and civil rights. I met with the Sikh community 2 nights ago. They are half the taxi cab industry. They are miserable at how they think they are picked on sometimes by riders and others because they wear turbans. Tragically, a Sikh in Arizona was killed within a week of the September 11th attack merely because he had a beard and a turban. Should I be the mayor, having been a civil liberties lawyer and a candidate emphasizing safety first, I know I can find that proper balance between order and liberty.
Mr. Bloomberg?
I like what Bernie Carrick's doing. You try to get out the information of the race and ethnicity of people that are stopped and the officer doing the stopping and the location. Jack Maple said if you don't have the data, you can't manage it. First, find out where we have a problem. Clearly, some officers behave in an inappropriate manner, and clearly a lot of people, there's a perception of racial discourse and discrimination that is just as bad as the facts. The second thing is you've got to start at the top and say no tolerance, training, and diversity at the bottom.
And how prevalent do you think racial profiling is within the New York City Police Department?
The perception is very widespread, and since that's just as bad as the facts, I think you have to attack it full-blown all around the city. In terms of the actuality, it is probably a very small number of police officers. Most police officers in this city work very hard. They are not racist thugs. They really do work with the community. We should be very proud of most of the NYPD.
Okay. Let's go now to Brian, who has a question for Mr. Bloomberg. Brian?
Mr. Bloomberg, as the city goes forward with rebuilding in a new administration, what role, if any, would you like to see Mayor Giuliani play?
Well, I would love to have the mayor give his advice, I think, in a practical sense. He's going to be very much in demand on the speaker's tour. He has been, I'm told, offered the job, or at least there's a rumor that he's been offered the job as baseball commissioner. I think the mayor's probably going to want to go and take a little bit of a vacation, but he will certainly be very helpful in the transition, and the longer he wants to stay on to provide advice, that's fine. There can only be one mayor, and I think this mayor understands that. He does not like czars, never has, and he would not be interested in a position like that, nor should we have it. The mayor should be in charge of the government. The mayor should perform the functions that the mayor is elected for. But I think Rudy's done an enormous amount for the city over the last 8 years, and he deserves a rest, and I think the federal government will certainly find a place where he can make an equal contribution at a national level to what he's done here. He's term limited, and he just can't stay on in this job.
Mr. Green?
Ditto.
I'm glad we got something.
Except for the part that he may get a federal job. This is beyond my ability to influence. Look, the mayor was thrust into a catastrophe and rose to the occasion, has a unique knowledge about how to help lead then the rescue, now the recovery and the cleanup, and has a unique stature around the country. Should I be mayor and have to go to Washington to lobby House chairman? It's a Republican House. He'd be pretty good to bring along. But we have one mayor at a time. I can't recall when an incoming president or an incoming mayor hired his predecessor, even though the predecessor may have been on day one more knowledgeable. The mayor's given a lot of service to the city, none better than in the last 6 weeks.
But both of you were very quick to say the mayor could stay on for an extra 3 months to help out with the transition and be part of your teams. Have you changed your minds about that?
I thought the mayor's idea of increasing the period between the election and the inauguration made a lot of sense.
So why not do that?
I think the state legislature should, not just for this time, which they're obviously not going to do, but they should do it permanently. 7 weeks, including December, is just not enough time. It would be better to have more time. You can do it without it, but why make it difficult? The federal government gives you till January 20th. Why not? Why shouldn't we?
But I think my point is you could provide an office for the mayor and keep him on board at your own discretion.
It's not that. It's a question of how much time it takes to go and evaluate his staff, see who you want to keep, get other people, convince them to join your administration, and let them wind down their personal affairs before they can come.
And Mr. Green, same thing for you. You had said to the mayor, yes, you can stay on for 3 months. Why not have him there with you?
2 points. It wasn't so much to keep him, the indispensable man, on, but the team on. Transitions are hard enough. I've done 2. In 92 federally and in 93 municipally. More time, given the calamity, probably was at a close call, but a good call. But because I've been the #2 elected citywide official, next in line to the mayor, understanding that, God forbid, there were a vacancy, I would have to fill it. I've thought about transition for 8 years, especially when the mayor was running for the Senate and he could have vacated the office. I alone of the 2 candidates can hit the ground running with transition plans, because I don't have your experience in selling computers to businessmen, but you don't have my experience at running a government.
How would your management style differ from Rudy Giuliani's? Mr. Bloomberg?
I tend to be a very open person. I dialogue. I don't have a private office. I'm very approachable. And I think the mayor is somebody who keeps his own counsel much more than I do. I think that is one of the key differences. I want to talk to as many people as I can. Rudy seeks advice from a lot of people, but I think my style of getting that advice, I tend to spend more time with as many different people as I can find to give me advice.
Okay. Mr. Green?
I've always been impressed with President Lincoln's ethic of leading by listening. And so I sit down with as many smart people as I can. The best and the brightest of 30 years ago is the phrase. Then we'll argue with them. I can be feisty and opinionated. And then, because I'm a strong, independent Democrat, nobody owns me, no one's ever said they own me, I can decide what's in the interest of the whole city. Diana, I set goals, I delegate, I hold managers up to high standards, and then I hold them accountable.
Okay. You both have agreed on a few things tonight, disagreed on a few things. Name the trait, now that you all have gotten to know each other, name the trait that you respect most in each other. Mr. Green, what do you respect most about Mr.
He's
Bloomberg?
a fast learner because he's never had any experience doing anything in government, and he's catching on, but probably not by the 6th.
Mr. Bloomberg, what do you respect about
Well,
your
it's not
opponent?
Mark's judgment as to who's going to win on the 6th that I admire. I think that Mark has been a good public advocate. His skills are to go and to find problems. My skills are to go and solve them. That's the fundamental difference between the 2 of us.
Okay. Thank you, audience. And I assume you both agree on the Yankees tonight. Going for Game 5.
Hope springs eternal for the Red Sox.
I will be there tonight, thank you.
Okay.
Watch your television.
It is now time for your closing statements. Each candidate will have a minute 15, and by random drawing, Mr. Bloomberg, you get to go first.
Elections are about choices, and choices are made based on character and accomplishment and potential. When it comes to character, I think anybody that's known me for the last 59 years will tell you that I am honest, I am loyal, perhaps sometimes to a fault. I speak my mind. I always try to be realistic. When it comes to accomplishment, I've built a business, I've hired 8,000 people, I've negotiated contracts, dealt with unions, met budgets, delivered things on time. When it comes to having a skill set, the mayor's job is about management. I know how to manage. The mayor's job is about leadership of 250,000 employees. I've shown I know how to lead. The mayor's job is about being accountable. I'm accountable every day. The mayor's job is about innovation and trying new things. That's why we've been so successful. I've been endorsed by the 2 best mayors this city has had, one a Republican, Rudy Giuliani, one a Democrat, Ed Koch. I've been endorsed by the 2 best governors we've had in modern times, Republican George Pataki and today Democrat Hugh Carey. I think I have the skills.
Mr. Green.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you, everyone watching and thinking about New York's future. There is a clear choice this year between a proud Democrat and a Republican businessman, between someone who is in touch with the neighborhoods of New York, because I've been to them. Ask yourself, who shares your values, who understands your priorities best? On education, we need smaller class size, more schools, more computers in the classroom. I'm proud that teachers have endorsed that view. On safety and security, I have a plan in this new terrorist era, and if the police and firefighters, our heroes before, on, and since September 11th, have put their faith in me, that I can best protect our families, I'm extremely proud about that. On keeping jobs here and attracting jobs here, Crain's, the business publication, and the New York Times, when they endorsed me, said that I had the best jobs plan for this city. Look, I know the neighborhoods of this city. I love this city. I want to help save this city after September 11th. If you think that we can be stronger and better, if you think I've been a fighting advocate on your side, sharing your values, I ask for your trust and your vote next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green, and thank you, Mr. Greenlee. And now, our studio audience says thank you. I'd like to thank both of you for participating in tonight's debate. I'd also like to thank our reporters out in the field and our co-sponsors, WNYC Radio and the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. If you would like to learn more about New York City government, the League offers publications such as What Makes New York City Run. The League will also operate a voter hotline on Election Day, and that number is on your screen right now. It is 212-213-5286. You can also find out more about what's on the ballot from their website, and that too is on your screen. It is www.lwvnyc.org. Finally, the League urges you to vote on Tuesday, November 6th here in New York City. The polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., and we hope that tonight's debate has helped you in making your decision. I'm Diana Williams. Have a good evening, everyone. And now you all